Hello and welcome to the next devlog on my YouTube channel about the game Glass Miners that I've been working on over the past few months. This week we are going to talk about biomes, which are a feature that I implemented over the past few weeks. It took longer than I expected because the design of these new biomes was actually harder than I expected, and I hope to get something out quicker. So this took over a month now of working, but yesterday we basically internally released a new version of the game with biomes implemented. So I wanted to make a video showcasing what they are, why I implemented them, and kind of the process behind it. So the game has had sections for a while now. A section is basically delimited by emitters. So whenever you power the next emitter, you charge it up, you interact with the flag, then you unlock the next section. A section is currently 18 tiles wide. And so we've had these sections to kind of give a rough structure to the game, so that basically you feel like you're making progression and there's not too much going on at the same time, because we kind of limit how much we generate every time. And there's also this crucial aspect that, the entire point of the game is to keep this emitter beam alive, right? So that's your light that is really important for your survival. And you keep that emitter alive by charging it with coal. But if the emitter was too far away and you'd have to walk like 100 tiles back to it, then most of the game would just be spent walking, and that doesn't feel good. So we need to, give you an emitter every so often so that you don't have these long distances to walk. However, what we realized over the past months, the more we playtested it, the more the game just felt repetitive, because it was. It's always the same kind of mechanic, it's always the same gameplay loop that you're doing in these sections, because these sections are generated randomly, but they all feel the same, basically, which is fine. That's kind of the core game loop that we're going for. But especially we as developers, the more we playtested, the better we got at the game, naturally, and the more it felt like a chore at some point. It was like, well, how long do we keep going here? Because we can probably keep this up forever. And so that kind of felt bad, and we figured out, okay, we need something else in this to break that kind of repetitiveness and the boringness that would set in eventually. Okay, so let's talk about why we actually decided to go with biomes. There were a few reasons. The first one's just plainly breaking the repetitiveness. So we figured, okay, well, the base game is just, it's the same always. So how do we solve that? Well, sometimes we force you to do something else. It's obviously still the same game, but it's a different mechanic. It's a different way of thinking about the game and what you actually do. And this can then spark the interest in what is to come, especially if you're new to the game. You might wonder, well, you maybe have seen the first biome and you wonder, what else is there gonna be later? And so this makes the game feel more complete, I guess, in exploring the idea space behind the game. So we're not just, at the surface, like we just randomly generate stuff. We actually think about, okay, well, what could be interesting about the rules of the game that we've set up currently. Also, this is on a more meta level. This provides natural challenge gates, what I call them. So it's what we also had was this kind of the game can sometimes like just kind of peter out, where you're running low on resources and you feel like, okay, well, it's getting less and less, but we can kind of hold on. And at some point it's just like, well, now we ran out. And while this can sometimes be exciting, especially if you can actually hold on, it can also sometimes feel like the game is just not that balanced that well. It's like, okay, well, how am I supposed to keep going if the game just doesn't give me any resources? Like, what's the idea behind this? And having biomes is instead a way of having natural challenge gates, where the player knows, hey, this is where I'm supposed to fail, so to say. I need to prove that I'm actually good enough to pass this. And if you do pass this, then you get this reward of being like, okay, well, I beat this section. Okay, so now I am allowed to keep going. And that, I think, feels a lot better. And it's also just structurally, it gives the game a structure, which I think is always necessary in media in general. So that's why we have chapters in books, for example, or like seasons and episodes and shows. It just gives you a way of comparing yourself basically to game or playthroughs before, you can be like, well, this time I reached the lava biome, so next time I want to reach the lava biome again and then be better than this time. And it's just not so much a blur in hindsight as well. It's not like, okay, well, I did the same thing for 40 minutes. It was like, well, I did those things and then something very important happened, and so I can remember that happening. And it also just, again, it makes the base game also more interesting because not only do you need to survive the default sections, you also need to think ahead and prepare, and you need to learn about, okay, well, I know, like last time I saw that there is the special biome sometimes, and I know that I'm going to need a lot of resources for that. So not only do I have to think about how do I survive the current situation, I also need to think about what resources will I need in the future, because I know that if I don't plan ahead, I will eventually fail. So let's jump into the game and see what the biomes actually look like. So this is the first of the 3 biomes that we implemented so far. This one we internally call the goblin nest. So the idea was to add like a kind of maze feeling to the game, because what we saw is that basically in the game you can usually go wherever you want, and we kind of wanted to limit that and force you to think about, well, what happens in that case where you need to decide what is actually the best way here. I also just really like the thought of, inspired by games like The Witness, thinking about drawing a line here and being like, okay, well, I need to, in my head, anticipate, okay, where should this line lead? What objectives do I have with the way I draw this line? And so I kind of wanted to port that over. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out that way, but I still think it's an interesting biome. And so you can see it's completely dark here. There's no light source, so we completely need to provide that by ourselves, for which, for example, we have this torch, which has been in the game for a while, but it wasn't never really that useful. But for this, it's actually very useful, because now I can go ahead and kind of explore, and now I can see, okay, well, this is kind of where it goes, and then there's a goblin here. So I figure that, the best way to beat this goblin is probably by removing this bedrock. Also, just note, I'm going to be cheating a lot in this demonstration. So this menu here is our internal cheat menu that we have as developers, which gives us access to like pretty much everything that we need. Obviously, this isn't how you usually play the game, but it makes testing and showing this way easier, because otherwise it would take some time. So now I can see there's actually multiple paths here. So there's 2 goblins which block these paths, but I can see like there's a path going here, and from what it looks like, it will also go somewhere up there. And so I will just recharge the emitter to make sure I don't run out, and then I will try to figure out the best way through this. Obviously, I don't want to get hurt, so I will just remove that goblin. Also just realized that one more cheat was also active. And now I can see, okay, there's definitely a path up there. And it turns out that this is probably the only path, actually. But what I'll do is I'll just craft another torch and investigate what is going on here. So we can see, okay, well, there's actually a path down here again. And I was still cheating. That's why I didn't get hurt here, so let's just be fair. So I can either go down there, but there's a goblin, or I can go this way. And this is actually where the emitter already is. So this is probably for me easier. And so what I'll do is I'll place another mirror here. I will also recharge the emitters, and I will grab the flag and move along here. Oops. And that's already it. So with this biome, it always really depends on how the paths are actually generated. So you can see I had to use a lot of code here to just figure out my way. I had to plan ahead a bit and see what the path actually looks like and what is the best way to go on about this is. So that's kind of, it's very different to the usual game. And it's also, as a single player, this is actually not that hard, but with multiplayer it gets a lot harder, because there's very tight spaces. So you really need to think about, okay, where do I put my stuff? What do I do about chests? How do I maybe open a path to get back to the emitter? Because if there's a lot of stuff just lying around, like chests and obviously different players, then that tight space can also become a big challenge, which is something that obviously I can't demonstrate right now, but that is definitely an interesting topic. So let's look at the second biome that we have. This one is called the lava lake. As I walk here, it should be pretty obvious why it is called that. Basically, we just generate a lot of lava. And so to beat this, what we've also had for a long time are these, which we call slabs. So I can, mine some stone, and then I can lay that stone on top of the lava. And then we can see, okay, well, the lava disappears. What was implemented before was that the slab would actually disappear after, I believe, 20 seconds, so pretty fast. But we thought that that was actually too harsh for this new biome. So we changed that, and now it has a user limit. So if I walk on top multiple times, you can see, okay, it starts slowly degrading. If we do that often enough, then it will actually disappear again. The other thing that we realized was in this biome specifically, it is very likely that you actually won't come back to the emitter. So the way because of this limit with the slabs, what you usually do is you just grab everything and, move it from one side to the other, but you don't really go back. Because that would require a lot of stones, because we would have to place these stones on the way to the other side. And then if you want to go back, you might have to use more stones as well. And so we realized that that was actually pretty challenging sometimes, because you just don't have that much time. And what we added was overcharging the emitter. So if I put a lot of coal in here, you can see it turns orange. And you can see that it actually, we have like two charges basically. This overcharging is actually inefficient, so it will take double the resources. So you really have to think about whether it's actually worth it. And you can also only recharge to a certain limit, which I think is 45 seconds, if I remember correctly. But this is an option that I can do if I want to be sure that, I actually make it across. I can just put a lot of coal in there and then start moving. So this is what I'll do. I'll again sheet here. Obviously, this is again single player, which makes this easier. And also I don't have any chests with me. If I do have chests, then this also becomes a lot more work, because I also have to move the chests along. And so here I realize, okay, well, there's actually 2 frogs, which will actually kill me in this case, because I only have 2 hearts left, which means I need to take the time to actually kill them. But because these slabs are no longer limited in their time, this isn't actually too bad, because I don't need to hurry in that sense. I do obviously need to hurry in the sense that my emitter will eventually run out, even if I now have more time. But what we also did for this lava biome is we tried to generate like a sort of bridge in the middle, which you can see here. This is very randomly generated, so it will not always look like this, just one straight line. But it is supposed to be a little bit more space where you can just breathe for a second. So this would probably be the area where you will store your chests, for example. And then I can think about what the best route for this would be. And I guess the easiest solution will actually be to go up there. You also see that for this biome, we do generate a lot more stones, just so that you're not completely stuck. That might be tuned depending on a lot of playtesting. So maybe this is, maybe we do want you to think about how many stones do I actually need, because these chests, they're there for a reason. So it might be interesting to just force you to think ahead, but we'll see about that. So now I actually forgot the flag. So I need to go back here, and I can also see that it actually, like we see that the emitter starts flickering. So we're running low on time here. Luckily I managed to get on the other side, and I managed to beat the game, but you can also see that this frog down here almost got me. So this is obviously the intention. We want like these biomes to be a big challenge. We want the biomes to naturally end the game sometimes. So the fact that they can be pretty tough to beat is very much intentional. Okay, and so now we've reached the last of the 3 biomes that we currently have implemented. This one we internally call the fortress, because it's an area that is heavily fortified, so to say. There's a lot of lava, lots of bedrock, and lots of monsters, and pretty much nothing else. So it's supposed to feel like fighting through like an area. And for this biome, it is also crucial to have this change to the slabs, so they actually will last, because you will probably have to put some mirrors on top of these slabs, which you can do. Because otherwise the game can be pretty tough in terms of where you actually put your mirrors to, for example, kill monsters. And so for this, I will also, that's not what I meant to do. This is what I meant to do. I will also cheat. So I can, for example, just remove any kind of entity, just in case you're interested. So what I meant with this is I can, place a mirror here, and then I can also place 2 mirrors here. Obviously, this wasn't the best of examples, but just to show you what I mean. Here, it would really suck if because this emitter is placed on a, this mirror is placed on a slab, it would really suck if the slab would just disappear. This way I can just keep that forever. In case I want that to happen, let me also just remove this quickly and remove this. And actually there's a frog on the left, so I won't go there. There's also a frog or a goblin there. A lot of monsters here, obviously, but that's kind of what we were going for. So I realized that this is probably not the way to go. Instead, I want to go down here. And then let's look at this setup. So depending on the resources that I have, I might either want to, break through the bedrock here, or if I had a lot of stones, which I do because I can cheat, I will actually go through this area. And there I can see, okay, well, there's a lot of monsters again that I need to fight through, but that's kind of the point. And so I can kill those. Obviously, if I would have moved up there, then this wouldn't have been an issue. I wouldn't have to kill those. So that would have been the better decision in the end. But that's what you're kind of supposed to learn, or to take chances as well. And so lastly, we should be coming close to the section here, or to the end of this biome. I now need to break through 2 bedrock. I don't really have any options here, so I can just do that very quickly. And obviously, because I misclicked before, we already completed this section, but at this point, I would have reached the end. I could now activate this emitter and then beat the biome. But you can also see that, we're getting close to the end here, so I'm starting to run low on time. So this would have been actually pretty close, whether I could have actually managed this without cheats. Okay, so at the end, let's just quickly talk about how I actually implemented those biomes. That implementation is basically what took a lot of time, because I had to figure out, like, okay, I have some idea in my head on what might be interesting, but then writing the code to generate something like that is actually not that trivial. And kind of that implementation, tweaking all the, knobs to actually get something that is both kind of what I have in mind, but also has enough variety based on the generation, because I don't want the same lava lake to appear every time, because that's boring. And so let's just look. The lava lake is the most random one of these biomes. It is kind of similar to how the other random generation for the normal sections work. We basically have a weight table here. So this weight is basically some number that we use to figure out what tile to place there. And so the bigger the number, the more likely it is to actually be placed. You can see that the lava tile has usually a weight of 100. So that's obviously why most of the tiles are lava. We can also see that, there can be some crystals in there. There can be some rocks or some frogs in there, but it can also just be empty, the tile. And you can also see what I meant before with this little bridge in the center. We kind of do that by reducing the weight of the lava tile if we are starting to be close to the middle of the lake. So in this case, we would actually go down to 70 as the weight. So we are less likely to spawn lava there. So the goblin nest was actually the most difficult one to implement. What I went for in the end was I would generate this kind of maze, which is a tile map. I would initialize every tile in this maze with bedrock, and then I would generate a random path through this bedrock, which is like every tile on this path would actually be empty. And so what I do then is I go away from this path that I generate and generate subpaths. So subpaths are basically they are smaller in their length, and they have different conditions as to how they behave. And so that's kind of what I went for. So I have this kind of path generation in there to generate like where the empty space should be. And then based on these paths, I also generate the monsters actually. But figuring out how to do the path generation, how many subpaths to generate, what the logic behind this generation should be, and how to kind of balance that so that something playable comes out was pretty tough. And it's still definitely not perfect. So the example that I showed you before is definitely not an ideal example. That's not really what I want them to look like. But obviously we're kind of at the mercy of the random generation here. So in the future, I will definitely need to figure out how to optimize that a bit. And finally, let's look at the fortress biome. This one I actually kind of gave up with the random generation because I figured I actually want this to feel kind of structured. This is, it is supposed to be a fortress. It is supposed to be a human-made structure that is organized in a way. So I didn't really want to go with random generation here. At the same time, I wanted this obviously to be a little bit random so that, it's not the same every time, because then that's also repetitive. And so what I went for is this fortress biome actually is made of 3 different parts. And for each of these parts, I have 3 different options. And so I just select any of these parts and just put them together. And they're guaranteed to be playable, basically, because I have gaps in between them. You might have seen that when I actually play through that, there's usually this one basic column of gap between those. And so you can see that I actually define these parts as strings here to make it a bit easier. So L would be lava, B would be bedrock. And so that's kind of how I define these parts. And that means obviously I have 27 possible fortress biomes, which I think was good enough. And then I just select a random one for all these parts, and then I just generate that based on that. Okay, so that was my second devlog on the Glass Miners game. Hope you enjoyed that. If you would like to see more content, you can also watch me on Twitch, where I stream sometimes, or you can also join the Discord, which I'll link below if you're actually interested in looking at the source code or potentially also playing the game. Which would be awesome because I'm always looking for feedback. Then thank you for watching. What was interesting, and see you soon.